Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us across the fence. I'm Fran Stoddard. Garden centers and nurseries are reporting a surge in sales this spring and summer, and one of the key reasons for the renewed interest in gardening is the coronavirus. With more people at home and with more time on their hands, folks are digging in the dirt to grow their own vegetables. And of course, one of the most popular garden plants is the tomato. Here's UVM horticulturist Leonard Perry with early season tomato tips.
If you grow no other vegetables, tomatoes is probably the one you should grow. A few years ago I did a survey of gardeners in our area. Over 90% that grew vegetables grew tomatoes. Nothing better than a big, juicy tomato. Even those small, sweet tomatoes, fresh picked. I like to have those small ones near the edge. It's one of my requirements, so when I'm mowing, I can stop and pick tomatoes. The different varieties you can grow at home are great, especially from seed. If you have to buy them and don't want to grow them at home yourself, the seedlings, then you're more limited in varieties. They're still wonderful. But if you can want to grow some of the hundreds of other varieties, I picked some with odd names like Bloody Butcher. I love that name. Turned out to be one of our favorite tomatoes. It's kind of a medium size, very sweet, produces all season. It's great. There's many others. We're trying a couple others this year, but Sun Gold always is on our list. It's just a very sweet, golden, small cherry type tomato. So again, some great varieties you can grow yourself. Now once they're in the ground, several things you want to do is if you plant them early in the season, you want to be ready for frost. And that's what this Rime or spun bonded material can buy is for. And basically, if there's a frost, and this is 6 foot, you can double it over in the top and clothespin it together, and you'll have some frost protection overnight. Now this only gives a few degrees, so you don't want to plant out protection. You don't want to plant out too early. Generally mid to late May is good in our area, maybe toward the other end in the colder parts of the state. The other thing this does, we get a lot of wind, so this makes a nice kind of protected microclimate for these, so you really get a better start. So once they're planted though, you'll see some hay or straw. That's not hay, that's straw. That's weed-free straw. You don't want to use the hay, which tends to have weeds in it. And under that is newspaper. Put that down to help do two things in particular. One is control the weeds. Almost no weeding through the season in here, which is great. Love that. And also helps keep the moisture in. Especially good on these dry months and weeks. Sometimes we have a lot less watering going on, and the roots really will grow more, better tops too. So several layers of that paper, not just one. It has to be really thick. And then that straw on top. Make sure these are watered, of course, when you plant them, and keep them watered, especially getting set up. They probably don't need as much, being small plants. Also fertilized. If you didn't add some to the soil, if they start looking yellow, add more later. You see cages on these too. You want to get a nice heavy-duty wire cage. You can get some fairly inexpensive ones at dollar stores and hardware stores, but they really don't last. They bend, they flop over. So you want to invest in a little bit heavier duty cage that will last many years. If it starts to rust, good can of spray paint. You can change the colors on it. I love looking at the bright colors before you get all the big plants. They can topple too, because these plants get pretty big, hence the need for stakes. Now I used to use bean posts. Those tend to rot each year. You still can use those. In fact, the traditional way is to use a post and tie up all the tomato plant just to the post, but to me that's a lot of work. Cage is much easier, but to keep it from falling over later, use a stake. I use the rebar, which you can have cut at a hardware store to length, 5-foot section, or you can find a lot of these at home stores a lot of times. And these are toppers to prevent eye damage. When you're working around these, I really recommend. You can find these online, and you want flexible ones too, rubbery. The one that some of you find are very hard and they break when you try to put them on. If you don't want to go to that trouble, small piece of old garden hose works fine too. I use those as well. So cage the tomatoes, stake them, install this cloth around. I leave this on till about the 1st of July, and the plants are bigger than they're set up enough. You can take that off. And then watch the plants through the season. If they get a lot of extra growth on them, a lot of sucker growth, you want to prune some of those off, so just the main stems that are producing tomatoes, it doesn't put all its growth into the plant and not the fruit. And also watch for insects and diseases. You can learn a lot about these online. Sometimes some of these are on, and culture is my Perry's Perennial pages, perrysperennials.com, or also don't forget your local garden store that has trained nursery professionals. You can ask them questions about problems too.
As Leonard just noted, you can get additional gardening tips from his website or from your local nursery or garden center. You can also find more videos about gardening by searching our archives on the Across the Fence website. Our next segment centers around religion during the COVID-19 pandemic. Associate Professor of Religion at UVM, Elise Morgenstein-Furst, recently discussed the flexibility and inflexibility of religion during the pandemic. She spoke with students in the UVM reporting and documentary storytelling program.
I think a lot of folks assume that religion is for religious people, that religion is a private matter, and that religions are inflexible. The fact is, though, that religion is just an area of study, and its phenomena affects us all, whether or not we're religious. Religions are made up of people. So if people are inflexible, then sometimes flexible, then so too are religions. So I've got 3 images on this slide. The first in the center is the Pope at the Vatican on Easter Sunday. It's a completely empty scene in St. Peter's Square. And when the Pope stood there and gave his blessings for Easter Sunday, one of the things that he said was that he's not just blessing the square and the non-existent people there, but rather the whole world. In the top right is an image of a Passover Seder just a few weeks ago, a Jewish holiday that's also in the spring. And for many religious Jews, using technology is a big question mark in a religious ceremony. And yet for Seder, since you're supposed to gather with friends and leave your door open and welcome strangers, this idea of a home Zoom Seder, or a Zeder, as the internet was calling them, became really popular. And on the bottom right, you see a picture of Mecca, the Kaaba in particular. All the way back in February, the Saudi Arabian government canceled any pilgrimage to Mecca and Medina, the holiest sites for Muslims, and they are now considering canceling the Hajj, which is the major season in which most Muslims would go on pilgrimage. And so that image of the Kaaba with no one around it, as a scholar of Islam, is so startling to me. Because regardless of the time of year, that is usually one of the most busy places in the world, and certainly at a time when Muslims are gearing up for the holy month of Ramadan. To see empty places like this drives home the fact that folks are really having to make changes about their expectations around religious practice and religious communities, institutions, and individuals, and they're all either abiding by those choices or, as we'll see in a minute, not abiding by those choices. So what these images show us, I think, is that there's religious innovation happening across the board. There is a particular and particularly American religious response that we're seeing as well. And really, in the past weeks or so, it's been something that I found impossible to ignore in my various news feeds, whether that's online or TV or the radio, around folks participating in Open the Economy protests, making arguments around the fact that churches being closed is a threat and a violation of religious freedom or the First Amendment. We've seen governors suggest that churches in some places are essential and ought not to be closed at all. We've also seen anti-Muslim rhetoric around the unfairness of churches being closed, and with Ramadan coming up, wanting to see whether or not, quote, Muslims would be held to the same standard, unquote. And using the upcoming Muslim Holy Month as an excuse to sort of demonstrate a certain ideology wherein Christians are a beleaguered minority in the US. And I want to say loudly and for the record that that is absolutely factually inaccurate. And blaming Muslims for spreading COVID-19 is hate speech. It is hate speech. There's a long history in this country, and particularly of white Christian Protestant strains, with a particularly extreme view of science. And we're seeing that play out in real time. And I want to highlight that because I think that when we think of things like religion is inflexible, or we're seeing things like religious fundamentalists go protest, and we think things like, how come these people are so crazy? How come these religious people aren't listening? The truth is that that is a real minority within a minority. And there's a racial politic, a Christian supremacy politic, and an American politic happening all at once here. We're not seeing the same kinds of reactions in other places in the world. And even places that demographically look similar to us, like the UK or Australia, we're not seeing these kinds of responses. I want to name for the record that these are a particular kind of religion and a particular kind of American religion and a particular kind of Christianity that's having this anti-scientific, our religion is more important than the public health here. And I think naming that helps us see how religious people across the world are making more choices that look like innovation, changes to practices that account for science and account for the public health rather than don't. Just because that's a loud minority doesn't mean that they're a majority by any stretch of the imagination. When we're talking about religious change, these are defined by things we saw before, like the Pope preaching to an empty square or the empty Kaaba in Mecca and Zoom seders. But one of the ways that this affects all of us are the sort of grim realities of a pandemic that has, to date, claimed over 100,000 lives in the US. We have cemeteries, burial rituals, crematoriums, death certificates, all of these things that in the US are inextricable from religious institutions. How we mourn the victims of this pandemic has a lot of religious resonance for people. What kinds of processes of grief and grieving are available when you can't hug your sister or your mother or your child? And I'm not trying to end on a really dire note, but I do want us to think about where religion might pop up for us in our individual lives, even if we ourselves are not already thinking about how to manage an iftar during Ramadan while we're in social isolation.
Our thanks to the students in the UVM Reporting and Documentary Storytelling program, which is part of the Center for Research on Vermont in the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences. Once again, thank you for joining us across the fence. I'm Fran Stoddard. Stay well.